My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 34, a senior risk analyst at a logistics firm based in Portland. I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, where the skyline blurs just enough into trees to feel like I haven't completely surrendered to urban sprawl. I've always been the steady one, the one who remembers to send birthday cards, who returns shopping carts to the corral, who pays bills a week early just to be safe. My colleagues call me dependable. My friends say I'm the glue. But in my family, I've always just been there. Reliable, predictable, unquestioned. And maybe that's why what happened felt less like betrayal and more like slow-motion heartbreak. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. I found out by accident. A folder left open on my parents' kitchen counter during what should have been a routine weekend visit. It was one of those soft Sundays, gray sky, kettle, boiling. My mom humming something tuneless in the background. The kind of day where nothing feels urgent, until suddenly, everything does. I had gone into the kitchen to grab a glass of water when I saw it. Cream-colored, thick, labeled clearly. In my dad's sharp handwriting, estate planning. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. But the corner of a page caught my eye as I passed. It read, Asset allocation. My curiosity betrayed me. I flipped it open just far enough to read. The house, the savings, the car, my mother's, heirloom jewelry. Every single item was listed under my younger brother's name. Not a shared clause, not a split percentage. Everything outright. To him. And me, just a line on the final page. We leave no physical inheritance to Claire, but wish to express our deep love and pride in her accomplishments. That was it. That was all. Not a single thing more than words. Words that suddenly felt sharp and hollow. At first I thought maybe I was misunderstanding. Maybe there was another document. Maybe this was old. I even looked around the room, expecting someone to laugh, say it was a joke. But no one did. My parents continued as if nothing had happened. My mom pouring tea, my dad flipping through the Sunday paper. My brother wasn't even home. And I stood there, holding the weight of that folder like it was a verdict. Later, I sat in my car for nearly an hour before driving home. The rain had started, a slow drizzle tapping against the windshield. I didn't cry. Not then. My mind kept circling, back to one question that wouldn't let me go. If they love me, how could they erase me so easily? That night, I opened my laptop and went back through my finances. Every payment I'd made to help them, medical bills, property taxes, emergency roof repairs. Over the last 6 years, I had quietly contributed more than $42,000. And still, they left me nothing. Not because I wasn't family, but because they assumed I'd understand. But I didn't. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in my apartment, the buzz of the heater too loud, the silence too sharp. I kept replaying everything, every word they hadn't said, every moment I'd brushed aside the sting of being overlooked. The lines in the will haunted me, not just because they were ink on paper, but because they echoed a truth I had spent years trying to silence. They never thought I needed anything. That was my role. To need nothing and give everything. All these years, every sacrifice I made, was quietly absorbed into the rhythm of family life. I was the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who never asked for help, who showed up with groceries when money was tight, who offered to pay off their medical debts without them even needing to ask. I thought that being dependable meant being loved. I thought that the more I gave, the more they'd see me. But what they saw was someone who didn't break, someone who didn't complain. And in their eyes, that made me optional. Strong, yes, but strength in our family was a sentence. It meant you didn't get to be human. The morning after reading the will, I opened the curtains and stared out at the street. The world was waking up like it always did. Buses passing, coffee shops opening, people rushing to start their day. But inside, something in me had come undone. There was a shift I couldn't take back. It wasn't rage. It was deeper, like a quiet resignation that I had spent years giving to people who never intended to hold space for me in return. I started seeing things differently. Little flashbacks played in my mind like old home videos with the sound stripped out. My brother getting a new car after wrecking his old one, and my parents co-signing without hesitation. Me, spending hours fixing their plumbing last year, then going home alone to a leaking ceiling in my own apartment because I couldn't afford both repairs. My brother failing out of his second college and still getting a second chance, a third, a fourth, while I worked 2 jobs through university just to make rent and never heard "we're proud of you" once. Even when I brought them solutions, they never saw it as help. They saw it as duty, something they were entitled to. When my dad's health started failing, it was me who took time off to take him to appointments. When my mom's prescriptions weren't covered, it was my card they used. They didn't even ask anymore. It became a rhythm, me showing up, and them accepting it like sunrise. And when I would pause, even for a moment, when I showed the smallest crack, they'd tilt their heads and say, "You're strong. You'll be fine." That phrase had followed me for years, like a blessing, like a curse. "You're strong." That's what they told me when I cried alone in my car after paying off my brother's 3rd maxed-out credit card. "You'll be fine." That's what my mom said when I moved into a tiny studio apartment to afford the money I was sending back home. The strength they admired was never meant to protect me. It was an excuse to ignore me. And I had let them. Because, for the longest time, I didn't know I could say no. I didn't believe that I deserved to be supported in return. That morning, I opened my old financial spreadsheets, the ones I used to track every payment. There it was, black and white. Over $40,000 in 5 years, gone to cover their crises, their oversights, their comfort. I had numbers, dates, even saved texts asking for help. But what I didn't have, anywhere in those files, was the word, "thank you." Not once. I realized something else that day, something that made my chest ache with a slow, burning grief. It wasn't just about being excluded from the will. That was the symptom. The real wound was older. I had been conditioned to believe that my worth came from how much I could endure. That love meant showing up until you had nothing left. That to be a good daughter was to be invisible. Quiet, efficient, reliable. But when the time came for them to show me the same care, they looked right past me. I thought of the night I missed, my best friend's wedding because Mom had a fall and needed help. I thought of the Thanksgiving I spent alone in the hospital waiting room because Dad's blood pressure had spiked and no one else was available. I thought of the Christmas I worked overtime to cover their mortgage payment. These were the moments they forgot when they signed their names on that will and left me out. And still, even with the weight of all that, a part of me wanted to call them, to ask why, to hope for some explanation that would make it all make sense. But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. They believed I'd be fine. That was the role they gave me. And this silence, this absence in ink, was their way of saying I'd always be the one who didn't need anything, even love, even fairness. But now, for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to be that person anymore. I used to think silence was noble, that not mentioning the money, the favors, the hours spent holding up a family that never once paused to ask if I was tired, was the right thing to do. That being the quiet pillar meant I was strong, respected, maybe even loved. But I understand now that silence, in the wrong places, doesn't earn you gratitude. It erases you. After I read the will and let the weight of that decision settle into my bones, I began revisiting the moments I used to wear, like invisible medals, not to reminisce, but to re-examine them with the clarity I never allowed myself to have before. There was the time I took a loan to pay for Dad's car repairs, because he needed to get to his doctor's appointments and didn't qualify for any help. I never told anyone how much interest I swallowed month after month. Then there was the winter the furnace broke and they called me at midnight. I wired the payment before the call ended. I still remember sitting in the dark afterward, staring at my empty bank balance and whispering that it was okay, that I could handle it. I thought my silence was love. But silence turned out to be a mask that kept everyone else comfortable while I disappeared behind it. The worst part? They never even asked me to do it. They just learned that I would. They learned that a sigh from my mother, or a hint of worry in my father's voice, was all it took for me to open my wallet. They learned that I never said no, even when I should have, especially when I should have. I made it easy. I thought that made me generous, but it didn't. It made me invisible. Every time I paid, I thought I was building something. Trust, closeness, respect. But in their eyes, I was just maintaining a system they didn't even realize needed me. They forgot I was choosing to help. They assumed I simply existed to help. And the more I gave quietly, the more I disappeared. There was a birthday dinner for my brother 2 years ago. I booked the restaurant, paid the deposit, even picked up the cake on my lunch break. No one noticed. They clinked glasses, laughed at his stories, and when the bill came, everyone reached for their phones, their coats, their excuses. I covered it. Again, no one said thank you. The next morning, Mom called to ask if I'd help fund his business idea. Again, I had built a pattern with my own hands, and then grew angry when no one else broke it. But how could they? My silence said I was fine. My smile said I wanted to help. My bank transfers were love letters they never had to read. I kept thinking back to that phrase. You're strong, you won't mind. And I realized it was never about admiration. It was a dismissal dressed up as a compliment. An easy way to excuse not caring. Because when someone is always fine, always available, always saying yes, why bother checking in? Why wonder if they're exhausted? Why offer anything in return? I started pulling back, subtly at first, letting a text go unanswered, skipping a call, saying, I'll see what I can do, instead of course. And even that was enough to shake them. Amanda, my brother's wife, called and said I seemed distant lately, that the family noticed. They noticed the absence of my service, not the presence of my exhaustion. I began writing down every expense. Every memory where I said yes when I should have said no. It wasn't about keeping score. It was about finding my face again in the blur of transactions and favors. I needed to see myself, outside of being their solution. I started to wonder, how would they talk about me if I stopped paying? If I disappeared? Would they call me selfish, dramatic? Would they ever pause to remember the 10 years I held them above water? I already knew the answer. And maybe the scariest part of all this wasn't their betrayal. It was that I had betrayed myself first. I had taken my needs and buried them so deep that even I forgot they mattered. I had smiled when I wanted to scream, given when I needed to save. I had traded my voice for peace and ended up with neither. I always thought helping them would keep us close. But it only taught them that I was convenient. A face they barely looked at, hands that never stopped moving, a credit card that never said no. I thought love meant service. But love without reciprocity isn't love. It's labor. And so, I stopped. Not with a fight, not with a grand speech, just silence of a different kind. The kind that comes from setting boundaries. The kind that says, I won't disappear for you anymore. I won't pay the price for your comfort with my presence. I was done being the quiet one. Because silence hadn't protected me. It had erased me. And I was finally ready to be seen. Even if it meant being called cruel by those who only loved me when I stayed small. I kept telling myself I didn't care, that I'd moved on, that the will meant nothing, that it was just paper. But it stayed in my mind like a splinter under skin, small, sharp, and impossible to forget. It wasn't just about money or houses or things. It was about what that document said without saying it, that my parents looked at both their children and decided only one needed protection. Only one needed to be chosen. And it wasn't me. The house, the savings, the insurance policies, they left it all to my brother. My younger brother. The same brother who hadn't held a full-time job for more than 6 months in the last 5 years. The same one who had once used my credit score to open a card in my name because he just needed to build credit and forgot to tell me until the overdue notices started arriving. He's charming. I'll give him that. The kind of person who could fall headfirst into chaos and still walk out smiling like he planned the whole thing. People always forgave him, especially my parents. They said he was going through a rough patch. That phrase again. As if life itself were conspiring against him, and I was simply immune to bad days. I couldn't count how many times I watched him walk into a room and instantly become the center of attention. His stories, his drama, his next plan. Everyone leaned in, laughed, reassured him. And me? I was the one cleaning up after the storm he left behind. He wasn't malicious, at least not openly. He didn't set out to manipulate. He just believed, fully and completely, that someone would always catch him when he fell. And I had. Over and over. I paid his car registration when it expired. I sent money for his rent when his latest business idea didn't pan out. I covered the overdraft on his account once because Mom called crying, saying he was too ashamed to ask me himself. I even drove 3 hours to help him pack when his roommates kicked him out for missing bills. And still, when the will was read, it was his name on every page. Not a mention of my help. Not even a line about gratitude. Just my parents' unwavering belief that he needed everything, and I would be fine, as if I were made of stone, and not the same flesh and bone that broke silently every time I was overlooked. I saw his bank statements once by accident, left open on the kitchen table during a family dinner. Multiple cards in default. A loan with missed payments. A subscription to some coaching program that promised to teach him how to make 6 figures from home. I didn't say a word. I just helped Mom wash the dishes while he laughed with Dad in the living room about how corporate life was for suckers. And now he owned everything. The house I helped pay to renovate after the pipe burst in the kitchen. The car I once drove Mom to her chemotherapy appointments in because his was always in the shop. The insurance policy I'd helped set up when Dad retired early. All of it now belonged to him. No strings, no instructions. Just an inheritance wrapped in their blind faith that he'd someday figure it out. But the truth is, he never would. Because why would he? When there was always someone else absorbing the consequences. Someone like me. He called me 2 days after, the will reading. Casual as ever. Asking if I wanted to help him go over some financial stuff. I stared at my phone, feeling a new kind of fury settle deep in my chest. The kind that didn't shout or shake. The kind that simmered, slow, and hot. He had the nerve to ask for my help, after everything. But I wasn't surprised. He probably thought I'd say yes, like always. That I'd show up with spreadsheets and suggestions. That I'd sit across from him at the dining room table, explaining the difference between fixed and variable interest rates like we were still kids, and I was just the smart one. But I wasn't the smart one. I was the one who let herself be used and called it love. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling in my apartment, listening to the hum of traffic below. My place was small. The heater clicked whenever it ran too long, and the pipes groaned every time someone upstairs took a shower. But it was mine. Paid for with hours no one saw, sacrifices no one thanked me for. My brother, the heir of everything, was still living rent-free in the house I helped save, probably racking up more overdraft fees as he planned his next shortcut to success. And the cruel irony? If he fails, and he will, it'll be me they call, just like before. My parents will say he's trying, that he needs support, that I'm the strong one. Again. I used to think being strong meant never letting anyone see you break, but now I realize real strength is saying enough. It's looking at the people you love and choosing to stop sacrificing your life to cover their bad choices. He was the one they chose, but I'm the one who rebuilt my life without expecting anyone else to. Catch me. And maybe, just maybe, that's worth more than any inheritance they could have given me. There's a strange silence that follows betrayal. Not the sharp kind filled with shouting or accusations, but the kind that hums quietly beneath your skin, turning everything cold, even when the sun is out. That's how it felt after the will. After the phone call from my brother, after I finally let it sink in that I wasn't just overlooked, I was erased. And in the days that followed, I expected at least one moment of reflection from someone in the family. One phone call, one message, one flicker of remorse. Instead, what I got was something else entirely. A slow, creeping wave of guilt, but not theirs. Mine. Because somehow, through a series of subtle sighs, backhanded comments, and tired glances, they made it seem like I was the one who had done something wrong. That by stepping back, by refusing, to pretend nothing had happened, I was the ungrateful one, the dramatic one, the disappointment. It started small. My mother left a voicemail that began with, "I hope you're not still upset," and ended with, "Your brother is really stressed right now. Maybe you should reach out." No apology. No acknowledgement of what was taken from me. Just a reminder of my role. Be the one who keeps the peace. Then came the group chat, which I had muted long ago but still checked from time to time, maybe out of habit or some aching desire to still belong. A photo of my brother standing in front of the house captioned, "He's finally taking responsibility. We're so proud." Responsibility. That word hit harder than I expected, as if inheriting what he didn't earn was some kind of noble burden, as if keeping a roof over their heads with my income for the past 5 years didn't count, as if the sleepless nights I spent moving money around, choosing between my rent and their medicine, didn't qualify as responsibility. Suddenly, my efforts weren't remembered as acts of love. They were just expectations I had failed to meet. More recently, later that week, my aunt called. She's always been the family's informal messenger, the one who tries to smooth things over when no one else wants to get their hands dirty. She spoke gently, said she heard things had gotten a little tense, and maybe I should consider how hard this transition was for my brother. I listened in silence, staring at the wall in my apartment where a framed quote hung, "Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm." I used to think that was a nice sentiment. Now I lived by it. I asked my aunt if anyone had considered how hard things had been for me. Her voice wavered. She didn't have an answer, just a soft reminder that we all have our roles in the family, and maybe mine was to lift others up. I hung up before I could say something cruel, but my stomach burned with the unfairness of it all. Not only had I been left out of the will, but I was also being asked to feel guilty for not applauding the one who benefited from it, and the messages kept coming. Not directly, never directly. They were too careful for that. But sideways, slanted. Like a joke my cousin made at dinner. "Well, at least your brother didn't move across the country to be independent and then ghost the family." Everyone laughed, except me. Because I knew the punchline was wearing my face. There was never a thank you, not for the years I sent money, not for the sacrifices I made to make sure they never saw the edge of real struggle. I didn't want to be praised like a martyr. But I also didn't deserve to be cast as selfish just because I stopped saying yes. At first, I tried to explain. I sent my mother a long message listing everything I had done, dates, amounts, decisions I had made to help the family, to support them, to clean up the messes. I thought if I laid it out, if I reminded her, she would see. She would understand. She would call me and say, "I'm sorry. We should have done better." She didn't reply. The next day, my brother sent a short message. "You didn't have to make her cry." That was it. No acknowledgement of the truth. Just more blame. As if speaking facts was cruelty. As if silence was the only acceptable version of love. I realized then that my family didn't see me. They saw the version of me that was convenient, the one who never asked for anything, the one who didn't raise her voice, the one who showed up, card in hand, check already written, smile barely hiding the exhaustion in her bones. And now that I had stepped out of that costume, now that I had dared to say enough, they didn't know what to do with me. So they rewrote the story. I wasn't the daughter who had kept the lights on during 3 winters. I was the one who walked away. I wasn't the sister who'd paid the down payment when the family car broke down. I was the one who made things awkward after the will. I wasn't the person who gave without ever keeping score. I was the one who stopped giving. It would be easier, I think, if they had yelled, if they had argued, if they had screamed about betrayal. At least then I'd know they saw what I had done. But this quiet shifting of blame, this way they turned my boundaries into offenses, it was harder to fight. Because it made me question myself in ways I hadn't before. Maybe I was being petty. Maybe I should have just let it go. Maybe I should have been the bigger person again. But then I'd remember the empty seat at the lawyer's office, the way they read out the will and skipped over my name like it had never mattered, the way my brother smiled like he hadn't stolen anything. And I knew. This wasn't about being big or small. This was about being whole. So I didn't respond to the texts. I didn't show up for Sunday dinners. I stopped offering help. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Because love, without acknowledgement, isn't love. It's servitude. And I was done being the one who gave until there was nothing left. I don't remember the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was while I was folding laundry in the quiet of my apartment, sunlight pooling softly across the floor. Maybe it was when I finally booked that trip to Montreal I had been putting off for years. Or maybe it was just a small, subtle click somewhere deep inside my chest, like an old lock finally turning open. What I do remember is that one day, without fanfare, I realized I no longer felt like someone who had been left out. I felt like someone who had finally stepped in. For years, my life was shaped by what others needed. Every plan I made had to leave room for a phone call, a crisis, an emergency. I didn't just keep my schedule open. I kept parts of my heart reserved for fires I didn't set. I was the emotional insurance policy, the reliable fallback, the name on the other end of the text that always replied no matter how tired I was. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to reclaim those pieces. And with each one, I started to write a new kind of will. Not the legal document my family signed behind my back, but the kind that maps out who I am, who I choose, and what legacy I leave behind for myself. It started with boundaries, not the loud kind that burn bridges, but the quiet kind that mark the edges of your peace. I stopped apologizing for not attending every dinner. I stopped explaining why I wasn't sending money anymore. I stopped reacting to the guilt-laced messages that arrived in carefully timed bursts. My silence wasn't cold. It was sacred. It was the sound of a life no longer dictated by obligation. Then came the changes in my home. I painted my bedroom in a deep, calming green, not because it was practical or affordable, but because I loved it. I started cooking for myself again. Real. Meals with flavors I missed, served on plates I actually liked, not the chipped ones I never replaced, because someone else needed something more. I subscribed to a writing class, then a dance workshop, then yoga on Sundays. Each one was a sentence, a step, a breath in the will of my own life, saying, "This is mine now." I made new connections. People who didn't know me as the dependable daughter or the selfless sister. People who didn't expect me to explain myself. Friends who asked how I was doing and waited to hear the real answer. Colleagues who respected my time and space. Even strangers who smiled back in cafes and made me feel like I belonged without owing anything in return. It was in their quiet acceptance that I remembered I was more than what I had given. I was someone who deserved care too. The grief didn't vanish. Some days it still knocked at the door, usually when the seasons changed or when I passed places. Tied to old memories, I let it in, I sat with it, but I no longer let it unpack. Because now I knew that grief didn't mean I had to go back. It meant I had the capacity to feel, and that was something to honor, not bury. One afternoon, I went hiking alone. I climbed a ridge overlooking the city where I was slowly rebuilding my life. The air was crisp, the wind firm but kind. I stood there, watching the skyline stretch and blur into the horizon, and it hit me. This was what it meant to be written into the story of your own life. Not as a footnote or a provider or the silent strength behind someone else's glory, but as the main character, with flaws and power and agency. I used to think being left out of the will was the deepest betrayal. Now I see it as the final push I needed, because if they hadn't excluded me, I might still be living like I owed them something. I might still be shrinking myself to fit the role they carved out for me. But they gave me a gift they didn't even mean to offer. They let me go, and in that space, I chose to return to myself. The inheritance I write for myself now is not one of money or property. It's time, it's presence, it's boundaries, it's joy. I'm building a life where I don't just survive for others. I thrive for myself. I wake up and know that no one can take this from me, because I'm not asking anyone's permission to exist anymore. I'm not trying to prove I'm worthy. I am. They wrote me out of their version of the future, but I wrote myself into mine. Fully. Fiercely. And this time, I'm leaving nothing with anyone who didn't show up when I needed them most. Because the will of my life has one name on it now, and that's enough.